I've got the very talented artist, storyteller, and longtime friend Philip here today. Among his many talents, Philip studied game design in college, and I thought it would be a good idea today to ask you about game design and what you've learned through that course as well as outside of the classroom. I've also been interested in games and game design from board game nights with my family to working at a comics and games store for a few years. And then I've tried my hand at making video games, as well as I have an interest in the game Magic the Gathering, which has like a certain set of game mechanics that translate through all of their cards. Certain abilities like flying creatures, which have a skill that lets them fly over other creatures and damage the player directly, which can be played many different ways with the goal throughout still being more or less the same. Play cards until your opponent's health reaches zero. Game design, no matter how simple or complex, can bring people together and inspire creative new ways to play. Whether that's drinking games, making your own in-house rules to a game. I mean, it really depends on who you play Uno with as how those plus twos work. Do they stack? Do they not? We can share that. Any aspiring game designers chatting up about some game design. Philip, welcome.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for welcoming me to the Drawfiles, and happy to chat, man. Welcome me to the chat, dude. This is cool. Thank you for the intro. A little overview of tabletop genre and mechanics of gameplay.
Oh, thanks, man. I definitely wanted to give you a fitting intro. Very lucky to have you here. What made you want to study game design in that class? And was it just the one class?
Originally, I went to college and jumped into art and design, and I went to college at the Sequoias. And while I was there, I took a lot of fine art. I took even some film appreciation, and I took graphic design. And the big reason as to why I jumped into it was I've always loved storytelling. And so I don't know, I was around 12 years old or so, I started getting into comic books. And I just thought it was one of the most perfect mediums for telling stories and something that you could do by yourself, very inexpensive. Really, all you need is a pencil and something to draw on. Even if it's a napkin, you could still tell stories and leave your imprint. And I think that whole aspect of like being able to tell a story and essentially time travel, you're laying your thoughts down in a very illustrative way. And a story is a way that you can not just tell somebody how to do something, but get even deeper and more personal and more intimate with your end goal. So it's not just like telling somebody how to make a peanut butter sandwich. It's like a story takes it steps further in enabling the storyteller to communicate how that sandwich tastes, how it feels to make the sandwich, and how it feels to make it for somebody else. Stories can just take you so much deeper, and I feel like that is almost a type of immortality. So I jumped in with comic books, and all the way through college, I loved that. So that's why I did graphic design and illustration. But I pretty soon had taken a film class on screenwriting, and I ended up jumping into, or almost tripping into the film medium, which, just like comics, it has its limitations and it has its strengths. And I think it's just enabled me to strengthen who I am as a graphic designer and a storyteller. And it just really strengthened my resolve of I don't draw just so that I can push a pencil around. I draw so that I can share ideas, no matter if it's a comic book or a logo design like we're doing today. There's just so many facets of creativity that could be added to a simple image if you have the know-how, if you have the goal, and if you have the focus in mind for exactly what it is that you're trying to communicate with somebody. And every line is essential to that. So yeah, that was my first step, was learning graphic design, and with that came learning digital graphic design. And that has just, for me, I feel like it's blown my skill out of the water in comparison to who I was 10 years ago before I jumped on the computer and started using digital art. For one thing, you never run out of paint. It's so cool. And you can use layers, and you can always like use the back button. I think it helps build a confidence in an artist that they might spend years and years, decades even, trying to build that kind of confidence in themselves without digital art. So my outlook is that digital art it's a playing ground, where anything goes, and if you mess up, it's not a big deal. You always have the back button, and you can save your work as multiple files. But once you kind of get over that learning curve, you start realizing that having a vision in mind is the key. A lot of artists will just kind of fumble around a page with their pencil. And I think that if someone does that long enough with digital art, they build the confidence to know that there's not really any messing up. It's you could sit around and mess up all day and it won't make a difference. But the thing that does make the difference is knowing what you're going for before you even put pen to page. And then that confidence can allow an artist to get off of the computer and go straight back to their canvas or drawing pad and draw effectively and confidently. So that's brought me to where I am today with art.
It's pretty cool. If I recall, you did do a game design class as well as part of that, right?
I did, yeah. What was really cool about that is games are another storytelling medium, or they could be used for that. What's really cool about gamifying really anything is that there is a whole underlying facet. So whereas comics are typically used to be a vehicle to tell a story, a game can be that and more, because with a comic, you have very little threshold for learning a present skill. You can learn through comics, don't get me wrong, they could be a very educational medium. However, it's not as interactive as a game, and I think that's where gamification really has its edge over other mediums. Is the interactivity allows for a single person or multiple people to in real time activate the learning center of their mind and in real time allow them to grow in their skills, whether that's Yahtzee, whether that's Dungeons and Dragons, whether that's a video game, or even, believe it or not, even like collecting points at a grocery store. I don't know if you ever see, like, sometimes we have a local store called Save Mart, and maybe either annually or every couple of years, I guess that would be biannually, they'll have a Monopoly game through Save Mart where the more things you buy, obviously they're gamifying the process of buying things. The more things you buy, you get tokens that you can then use to win prizes through the store. Now, you might say there's not a lot of skill that entails, and there's not, but there is some skill. And that part of that skill is knowing what pieces that you need to look for. Now, that might be a minor skill, but you still have to understand the game to recognize, wow, if I get two more of these types of tokens, I can win, 50% off my groceries or whatever the price might be. So that's one facet that I learned from my gamification class is skill, building skill, and you do that through understanding of the game or understanding your present circumstances as well as how to get there. So you have to understand where you're at and you have to understand your goal. And the gap is closed by skill, but what really makes it a game? So you could have the skill to say, okay, I'm going to take this log outside. I'm doing my chores. I'm going to take this log and I need the skill to use my axe to split that log open and have firewood. Now, that's a chore. The way that you gamify something is you add an extra ingredient, and that is typically chance. So I say gamification is both skill and chance together. If you were going to gamify cutting logs, you have to have the skill, but you also have to have some form of chance. Now, I do not advise doing this, but if you wanted to gamify it, I guess one very reckless way would be, hey, how about you blindfold yourself and then swing away? Then you turn that into a type of game. And you shouldn't do that, but you could do that with just about anything. For instance, the best part of a game, and this is why games are typically shown with dice, because one of the most simple staples of something that represents chance at its core is a die, a single six-sided die, or anything that you can roll and give you a random outcome. So if you were, for instance, if you wrote a comic book that you sold along with a die or a pair of dice, you could gamify it by having certain instances in the comic where you prompt the person to roll the dice. And see, that could take you to a specific page number where any random thing could happen. If you wanted to apply skill to that, you could also have decision making, such as prompt somebody to say, okay, if you want the character to use a rope in this instance, turn to page 69. If you want somebody to use a hatchet in this instant, turn to page 57. And that takes a little bit of skill because you're making a decision. You're not just leaving it completely up to chance.
Mm.
The other thing that I learned in this class, I mean, this was a very extensive scientific process-based class. So we read a lot of scientific articles on gamification and communication specialists who had developed gamification around certain personal, certain societal, and sociological circumstances, I should say. For instance, there were some artists slash communication specialists who made a game that was based on helping people to take the first steps out of depression. And they were able to make, this was a console game that they made, essentially. It might even be on Steam. And I don't remember the name of it, but a lot of it had to do with allowing people to learn about what depression was for their loved ones as well as for themselves if they were in the middle of it. And by using chance and skill in the game, they were able to convey emotions that would invoke depression, but also invoke hopefulness through understanding what depression was. So, as you can see in just that very small, very simple example, gamification is fundamental to humanity and many other animal species. Just like when we started the class, they introduced us to the concept of gamification by introducing us to the true concept of what it is to play. As mammals, especially, we see mammals across the board from young pups to whales to humans, where, especially in our younger years, we play around, whether that's play fighting, play hunting, hide and seek, anything. And all of those games have a specific skill that they're building in young people, especially to prepare them for the real world. So when you're playing Crazy Taxi at Round Table Pizza, it's like that was my first experience with driving. Probably a terrible one at that. I'm sure anyone was terrified if they saw me on that game. But even games like hide and seek or tag, like those things were probably developed thousands of years ago so that our species could learn to take care of itself in the wild when mom and dad were gone. You play these games when you're a kid in a safe space so that you can go out into the dangerous world and build a civilization. So gamification is grossly overlooked as a building block and a pillar to our entire civilization, if you ask me. And it's very special.
The skills that come out of it and where all these originate from. Gamification, I feel like I'm seeing sort of in every aspect, like you're saying, point collecting at pretty much any store that has an app or a rewards program. And I like what you're talking about with just the different ways gamifying can be applied, which I think is really, really cool. And what would you say, like, overall, what are some of the things that this class covered? I've heard you say you guys looking into researching really what gamification is. And would that be the entirety of the class, or did you guys also get down into the most core values? What did it cover?
Some of the core values that we covered in our gamification course, along with skill and chance, was the whole human aspect of what a game is. So in order to develop a game, you have to start somewhere. I'll call that the cornerstone, just like a building has. The cornerstone is the first thing laid down, and the rest of it is built off of it. So it has to be this really big, chunky, fundamental piece of building block. In gamification, that building block would be humanity. And there's a lot of different facets to that, but keeping in mind the human value of your players and what their needs are. So those needs can be, this sounds like something you wouldn't hear from somebody who's developing a game that you play. Those things could be the fundamental needs of a person, like building a specific skill. And that skill could be a physical skill, but oftentimes it's a social skill. And you see that in the simplest games. I mean, you see that in, maybe a game of cards with somebody. You don't need a lot of moving parts to be able to have the interaction with a person. When it comes to building social interactions and building up your skill of communication, as well as, your savviness of problem solving, which we'll get to in a bit. But as far as communication with people, when you're playing cards like poker, for instance, a lot of people are very familiar with the concept of poker. There's a lot of chance involved, but it relies almost primarily on the skill of communicating non-verbally with the person, which could be, what we call a tell, right? People talk about the tells that somebody has. Now you're putting on a facade during poker so that you don't let your opponent know what hand you have, or maybe you want to manipulate what hand that they think you have so that manipulates their gameplay. And if you're good enough at it, you won't have a tell. And a tell is essentially something that gives away your act, something that gives away your mode of manipulation. But within the facet of this fundamental part of gamification that is communicating, those cards, that game, that's just a vehicle. That's just something that sits between you and the person across the table that you're playing with or against. And that vehicle is the thing that allows you, with roadblocks, it's steering you in a certain way. So there's going to be things you can and can't do. Those are the rules of the game. But if you abide by the rules of the game, it tells you the way in which you can communicate with somebody. And that's a good hint as to what kind of game it is. Just by reading the rules and seeing that the rules of this game only allow you to communicate with a person in this way specifically. And so that'll tell you, oh, wow, this game is meant to build this skill for me. So poker, you can chalk it up to a game where, yes, it's just about winning money and trying to get the best cards. But in reality, any poker player would probably tell you that you can't control the cards you get. You control the way that you handle your own emotions around other people to the very most minute piece of body language, whether it's tugging your ear, wiping sweat off your brow, or blinking a little bit too fast. The skill of poker is geared toward helping people with handling their emotions physically and physiologically. So that's one big piece that we would cover in game class.
At least looking into it for myself, in games, like you're talking to Cornerstone, I think certain things happen to be somewhat present in all games, and I think skill and chance are a big part of it. Limitations or rules matter the most, because two people could just do whatever they want, then the other one's going to just always put themselves in a position where they win. So you have to have these limitations set where you are able to or not able to do certain things. I think I might have told you in the past, like, I really am a big fan of open world games, Fallout, Skyrim, those games that basically act universe that you get to live in. And there's certain things that are just universal to life, as far as like stab a guy, he dies. But then there's certain things in that game that add intrigue, the creative. I think the few times I've played that, I get so enthralled in the universe because me personally, I love things that are creative. Like storytelling, like you were saying, portions come in where it's like, oh, now it's like, how many times does it take to stab a dragon as it's flying down shooting fire at you, and fire can burn you still, and it's like a big aspect of games for me. But I also found, after my third or fourth time doing nearly everything in that game, and once you think you've seen it all, a very interesting way to play that game is to not utilize the fact that you can just do so many things, but limit yourself to doing nearly only what you think your character can do. I mean, really role-playing it. If your character is a knight and you are pretty much locked into swords and shields, but you find yourself a super nice bow and arrow, better than any weapon you have, but you decided in your head right then and there, like, do not use a bow and arrow, my character does not do that, and you gotta sell that thing or put it up somewhere in like a house, because not using magic, my guy will not know how to use magic. And that's it, in this example is just Skyrim, but I'd make a character who's like, okay, like, I'm only allowed to wear, like, I think I did a character who just used non-violent magic. So it was a lot of illusions and not like shooting fireballs out of his hands, but confusing people to run away from him. And I made a kind of like a character sheet, really, of just like a little sticky note of limitations. It's like no heavy armor, so I would only wear robes and clothes. I also made it like no violent magic books are ever learned if you can avoid it. Because I think once you read a certain book, you just unlock a spell or however, like an ability, and try my best not to do those. And then I said that if I were to use a weapon, it would have to be something small, like a dagger. And that kind of limitation, though, at that point, it's like, why don't I just play a game where that is the whole game? But I think something that's so fun about that is now you have these scenarios that are going to go down the same way every time you play it. The dragon comes down and attacks the town. But now you're doing it as this character, these limitations, which kind of makes a whole new game inside the game, trying to make what you can out of this character, and that kind of limitation, that kind of challenge, to me, makes it a lot more fun. I think limitations and rules are obviously a big part of games, right? Like every game has rules, and then I think your players themselves, as far as like gamifying goes, then it really does come down to their specific wants and needs. You were saying how a lot of it just kind of scratches an itch for certain types of people. You and I like storytelling games, single player, big story kind of games. You know, we're big fans of those Batman Arkham games. That's just one guy using the tools you have and going through a story and doing little puzzles here and there. But that's just it. Like we like problem solving. We like games like that and stories. You know, I definitely get a competitive side. As far as video games go, I'm often playing games where it's either creative, survival, where I have to hunt and eat, but then I also have to make a log cabin to survive the nights. I love that kind of stuff. Whereas the left brain, creative enough, but the right brain, figure out time to go eat food and drink water and make sure my character sleeps at night, make sure I don't get attacked by bears. Kind of hits both sides, so that's why I'm quite a fan. But if you're talking board games and stuff, there's also quite a few. Like as we both know, I'm a big fan of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games in general, just for the ability to just create a vast world and play through it with friends and see how they react to the setting you build, or if you're a player, how your team can work together with each other. Maybe I could say it breaks down to creative and competitive. Some people play the games to win. Some people play the games to win atrociously. You know, I feel like there's people who like to win in a fair kind of way. There's people who like to, I call them like game breakers. These people look for rules that are like loopholes into being technically correct, into winning outstanding proportions. Like if you're playing Magic the Gathering, if there's times me and you played, let's build whole Egypt theme and I'll be the mummies, you be the slaves, and we're gonna revolt, have this whole big like battle kind of playing out in our head on the table. But then, you know, there's people who come to their local comic shop and either know an exploitative rule that makes something happen infinitely.
The pot of greed.
Yeah, the pot of greed. Exactly. You know, there's that whole thing. And then there's also the people who find certain card combos that cost a lot of money. And I could spend a whole day talking about, the ways to play and just the people behind them, the psychology behind it. I think that's super interesting. But I'll try to get us a little bit back on topic.
It is, though. I think it pertains to, because as far as games go, just like I had mentioned, what's the necessity of humanity? Greed, for lack of a better term, or not a competitive nature, but a nature that is...
I'd almost say malicious. Like they like to win in a way that hurts people. Yeah. They feel pleasure from others' pain, which is not great for the person.
And they feel pain from losing, even if it's just a little bit.
Yeah.
And not everyone feels that way, you know, but some people see a game as more than a game. They see it as self-worth if they don't win. And so I think that could drive some people who have that, I think, are driven to cheat. But at the extremes, I think they're driven to revel in someone else's lot. You know, they have to see that they're winning by 100 points. But I also noticed that never seems to satisfy an individual in that way, and it makes me wonder if there is a game that could help to set that, to ease their soul in that way, you know, to ease their psyche is still locked into that mentality. I believe that there is. I don't think games are often geared that way, though. I think a lot of it is kind of like, if they cater to it, they cater to it in the wrong way for people, like that whole pay-to-play thing. Like, yeah, you could spend $20 and get the best armor, but also it kind of defeats the point of the game if you're playing it on easy mode.
I mean, hey, I get it. Winning does feel good, but I'm much more of a fan of a close fight, almost like a chance. And again,
yeah, I remember that about you.
Yeah, like I definitely really like, a close fight. I also like awarding people's creativity. That was something I used to do when we would play Dungeons & Dragons all those years ago. Maybe the dice rolls weren't in your favor, maybe you didn't have a strong weapon, but instead of like, hey, I stabbed this guy, you're like, I cut the rope next to him. Hopefully a chandelier lands on the guy. And you know what? Most of the time, as long as it's in the cards, I'll definitely allow it, because I think that kind of play style is way more catered to me than memorizing all the rules and being like, well, sorry, your knife is 6 inches long and you're 8 feet away from it. You know, I definitely bend the rules a little bit without breaking them too much.
I jived with the way that you were a dungeon master. You were the first one to ever get me into D&D, and I almost, like, not that I fully understood what it was prior, but I always knew, as a fellow nerd, I always knew if I took that step and I played D&D, I was all in, man.
Oh,
Turn. And I'm happy that you're the one who got me into it, man, because it opened up simply because of the way that you were a dungeon master. It opened up a world of realizing that exactly what you said. Games aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have to be about just dominating something in the same way every single time you play. There's a lot of room for creativity in games, and that players could actually be held responsible for that creativity and be entrusted with their own growth in a game. So it allowed me to really appreciate tabletop open world style gaming. Now, as we know, not everyone can be trusted with that kind of creativity. Not everyone can be trusted to make their own rules for themselves. Like, I am a mage and I'm sticking to it and I'll never grab a sword, or I'm a soldier and I'll never grab a magic staff and do magic. Not everyone will keep themselves accountable in that way. Not everyone will quite understand right off the bat. A lot of their learning has to do with the way that they conduct themselves during a game and their integrity to stick with the rules. So if you leave, there's some people, and a lot of times it's the same people who will find a way to cheat with the hard and fast rules. If you leave them up to making their own rules, they become like Leroy Jenkins, and they'll definitely be breaking the rules if they're able to make the rules.
I definitely think I've been told by some they don't really prefer my style. That's just kind of comes down to the player as well, like the what you're trying to get from it. In a tabletop RPG, it's a universe bound by rules.
Yeah.
These rules are in these extensive rule books, anywhere between how much damage a sword does, how if a wall is 1 foot thick of stone, it would have to deal this much damage with a blunt object, put a dent in it. And I think that's really cool, and I definitely can see where an irresponsible game master or the dungeon master, I could see how if they were just doing things willy-nilly how they want for the sake of story, that could seem biased, either good or bad, where it's like I want these players to do what I want them to do, which I think is a good thing, is to build your setting and your characters and just see where they go, rather than having a quest be like, oh, this is the quest where they kill the dragon. I mean, like, this is the quest where the dragon shows up, and let's see where they go with it. Some people, I've been told, they're like, I don't know what the heck you were doing. It was like a choose your own adventure type book. Like, you're just going, letting us kind of do whatever. I think that there's times where that's justifiable, and then there's times where it's like, okay, I could see some people not, it's not for everybody.
There's some people who need something else from their game, and it might not be that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just taste comes a lot of times from necessity. Those individuals just didn't have the necessity of free will, that maybe they needed that structure. And there's a lot of people like that too. I think they make really good soldiers out on the front line, like they need that structure to be told what to do, and they might feel quite alone if they don't have those hard and fast rules or that captain. But the thing was, for me, I felt like, as far as the way that I've experienced you being a GM, the way that you mastered the game was a good balance of both. You still had rules, you still stuck with them, but there were priorities to that too. So yours was a lot more about telling a story, a digestible story, but allowing the players to be characters in that story. And it was a lot like a choose your own adventure story, but it wasn't just fly off the wall, do whatever you want, completely open world, no rules. Your rules were, you will have fun, you will choose your fun, but I'm here to make sure that you walk away with something digestible to come back to time and time again. And that's what I liked about your style.
I
You
appreciate
really
that.
understood gameplay, and you understood the meaning of games without even having to take a class on it, which is really cool.
Both of us are just really interested in storytelling, and I think it's such a fascinating medium that allows you, like, if you really wanted to get into it, it's writing, it's so many hobbies built into one. And it's a vehicle to be like, hey, this is this thing I wrote, here's these, really want to get into it, you could like draw maps, you could draw characters for other people so that they are aware of who you're talking to, leave some of it to their imagination or not. I'm also a big fan of miniature painting, and I think sometimes in battle those are really fun to represent what's going on.
Oh yeah.
And so there's so many things, that's model building, painting, writing, drawing, and if you really get into it, some of that random chance has like a statistics side of it, a little mathematics if you're into that. If it's like I roll a dice and a low number, you guys get no treasure. High number is like a super valuable treasure. Medium number could be any number of things. And sometimes that's
Yeah.
fun too, or being like, hey, I don't know where this story's going to go, but I have three different ways it could go. I'm going to roll a die and see which way it's going to go. And I think that's always pretty
Exactly.
fun.
And it seemed like, you still had rules yourself, that you would abide by as a master of the game. So it's not like you were just being very willy-nilly about it. Like you still had stuff that you had to answer to, which is pretty cool.
How would you describe a game? Now, I want kind of your own definition as well as a broad, more textbook answer. Something that is the universal definition, something if you Googled it, like what do you think it would say? And then also, like, what does it mean to you? Like, what is a game? And, like, how would you describe it?
I think that a game is a simulation of aspects of the real world that have shed away most of the danger aspects in order for the players to build upon a skill that represents something in the real world that they can grow in. It's oftentimes geared toward an appropriate audience in age or in skill level itself. That would be my like basic dictionary definition of a game.
That's very true. Completely, that so well put. What would you say it is to you then?
A game to me is like, and this is something that I think everyone understands about games, even if they've lived for just a couple days in their life. A game is something that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that's fun. It's something that you can lose at, and it's something that you can win at. So there's winners and losers, but it's definitely going to be something that is fun. But now, kind of building on that, it's fun because it's appropriate for the person. So for maybe a tiny tot, it would be fun to try to throw a ball across the room. That can be fun for anyone, don't get me wrong. But maybe for somebody who's middle-aged, they wouldn't think that's quite as fun as like a 2-year-old would. The same with like tic-tac-toe, some people might just be completely over it because they've won time and time again or whatever. So I think that a big part of that being fun is it has to be appropriately challenged. And I actually wrote a note on the page that I'm drawing on that says growing skill and Goldilocks. So a game is something that's fun because it's helping you grow in a skill. But if it's too easy, it's not fun. And if it's too hard, it's not fun. So it has to be just right. It just depends on the skill that you're trying to grow for how vast that threshold is for the type of people that can play it. I think if you were going to age grade a game for like 3 and up or 14 and up, you would basically be taking that into account, knowing how big the threshold was in skill level. And like you were talking about earlier, games will have a limit. Those limits, often called rules, allow you to hone in on the skill that you're building, the specific challenges that are being built. So as a game developer, you have to take that into account as your fundamental building block. Who is your audience? Who is it appropriate for? And how to gear that difficulty level for your audience. So all of that goes into a game. When you think about it, games, they can be broken down into something that's very complex. But at the end of the day, it's something that helps somebody grow in a fun way.
It helps to know your audience beforehand if you can, but then if you're making a game, it's interesting to think of, maybe you could think of it as demographics, and that's like one aspect of it, right? Because you were just saying, knowing your audience, differentiating from what they get from it, throwing the ball across the room. That one, is it because you like the act of doing so? Is it fun to do that? Is it fun more in a competitive way? You're like, I want to see how far I can throw it, and if it's further than your own limits of this is what I've done before, can I do more? Can I grow and expand that skill? But then, like you're saying, tic-tac-toe even. There's some people who play to play. There's some people who know certain moves. You could. There's a trick to winning that game. I think it has something to do with Xing out the at least 3 corners of the board. And
Don't tell everybody.
oh yeah, dude, the secret's out. That's something too, right? Like I'm a
Yeah.
big fan of the game chess, but I wouldn't say I'm particularly good at it. I like critical thinking. I like the interaction between two players being strategic, but all it takes is one guy. I used to make this joke whenever I'd be at work and there's a lot of people that we work together, but we have a lot of times where like common areas and we'll have chess boards and other games sometimes, and it's interesting seeing the different skill levels too, because it could be your first turn and you move a pawn and they're like, oh, I see you're doing the queen's gambit, or you're doing the round the rook. And I'm like, I don't know any named moves. I wouldn't say I'm in any way competitive in the chess game. I just enjoy quite a bit. I'd say I'm a pretty casual player at most things. But that's me. That's like the audience I am a part of. And I think that's pretty foundational too. I can totally agree where on the one hand, it's building a skill. It's simulating something in life that you want to do. And you're right, there is that middle ground of, for some people it's too easy, some people it's way too hard and this isn't fun. Maybe on the same, it's like not hard enough, because where people come into designing a game, and the one thing I hear the most is make sure it's fun. It's just, now you got to know, who is it fun for? And I think that's a big part of it.
I think that a lot of that is understanding your fellow humans, and that comes with going out and experiencing life more, going out and experiencing people more. That's my favorite part of game development anyway, and story development. I think that's something that has a lot of crossover, is your understanding of your audience, your understanding of their environment. You know, sometimes I think about GTA and any Rockstar game. The dream job for me would have been location scouting. Just going out into the real world, taking note of everything that applies, because you're gaining the real life, real time experience. And then that allows you to translate that to your audience according to their needs. For instance, Grand Theft Auto has almost everything that the real world has. But I'm sure there's some aspect of society in one way or another, or of an environment that they kind of look at and they say, well, we don't really need that. In the older games, you couldn't, and maybe the newer games too, I don't know, just walk into any door. Also, you know, you're going to see fire hydrants on the side of the road. While you can run them over, you can't necessarily go take a wrench and open it up and connect a hose to it and go fight fires. In the older games, you couldn't, and that's because they had a very specific goal. And it wasn't for you to necessarily become a firefighter, like in maybe some open world games. But it really, those took the image into account, but they didn't need the functionality of a fire hydrant. They needed the functionality of a car, maybe a weapon of some sort, and you know, so on and so forth. There's mechanics that you take in and mechanics that you weed out. And I think every storyteller does that. And the best thing for that is understanding the environment to choose from. Take what you love, leave the rest. And that's dictated just by who your audience is. Something I've also thought of while we're talking about this, when you're playing with a simple ball in comparison to, you know, playing with maybe a more sophisticated game, it seems to me that the more simple something is, the more freedom you have to grow in it. Tic-tac-toe, there's not really a lot of freedom there. You're literally boxed in, and you only have 9 boxes to choose from, or 5 at the most, because you're competing with somebody and taking turns. That you can only do so much with it, but you take a ball and you can do, the possibilities are almost endless. The possibilities are only finite by your own rules and your own self-growth. So you decide what you were talking about. How high can I throw this ball? How hard can I throw it? Let's get more specific, like, oh, can I get it in this hole? Can I get it in this hole from that distance? This is probably why most of the, what we call sports, which are also games, why they're so long lasting. Season after season, people are still watching, you know, 49ers play football. Other than soap operas, I don't know what other entertainment has gone on that long. Certainly not a game of tic-tac-toe. The simpler the device, or the rules, I should say, the simpler the rules of the game, I think the more longevity it has, because it's not restricted in growing with its audience. It can grow in any way the audience needs it to.
But hey, have you ever heard that joke? I'm currently on season 2 of football, but I heard it gets really, really crazy around season 45.
No, I like that though. You know what makes sports better, man? Just like a story is better if you can add interaction and gamification, an interactive game is better if you can add storyfication to it. They storify sports all the time, whether it's Billie Jean King being, you know, like this badass tennis player. Who's going to win? Billie Jean King, or, you know, this woman tennis player, or this man tennis player. You know, I am making this up, but I feel like this is what was being interjected at the time for a man versus woman tennis match, was like a dramatic David and Goliath kind of story that they were trying to build. And it was probably, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, it was probably for the time one of the biggest watched matches ever in tennis. We have heroes that we put on a mantle in sports because we want to give them the story. We want to deliver that to the audience. And I personally believe it's the same reason why Well, here's my conspiracy theory coming out. You take Taylor Swift and okay, I'm not a sports guy, so I forget her fiance's name. I could tell you that right now. I'll sit down and watch sports, but I don't get caught up in it. But I believe that that's probably exploited to storify and add story to football, and at least for the Chiefs games. I think he plays for the Chiefs.
He does.
Yeah, so add that love story, but they've been doing that since. See, I'm blanking on the names, man. I'll gamify this for you. Who is this is some trivia. Who is that lady who went out with Kennedy and she's also like the big beauty symbol? What? Marilyn
Marilyn
Monroe.
Monroe.
Who was with who was the baseball player that she was with? I think he was a Yankee. Dude, he was like one of the biggest baseball players of all time. I'll get back to it. But the thing is that she only ever dated politicians and like social guys, and I'm not saying DiMaggio wasn't, but she was known to never date like sports guys until DiMaggio. It almost became some exploitation stunt by the Yankees, where some people think that those two were making money off of it because it was making the games more money, tied in with this media symbol of a person who was Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, whether they've constructed that to get people in the seats, I think it does create an investment. And you're right, that background knowledge, that connection, maybe it appeals to a different audience because, you got now one of the largest pop artists, pretty much her entire audience now merging with this football team, at least in part. I doubt there's too many Taylor Swift fans that are just such big fans that they just started becoming Kansas City Chief fans, but I'm sure there's a couple just cause. Yeah. Like they bought the jerseys. Travis Kelce, by the way, is the name of the guy.
Travis Kelce, yeah, thank you. I knew it started with the T.
You know what? Yeah.
Is that ethically, the ethics of games and what it does for your audience, how you interact with your audience through game and through story, is it ethical if their relationship is exploited for fans? It makes me think at first I want to say no, but then I consider like, okay, but how many children and parents bonded over that? How many daughters who are super fans of Taylor Swift and dads who are super fans of the Chiefs, now maybe dad is like, yeah, let's go to a Taylor Swift concert. Or maybe the daughter's like, Dad, I really want to go to a Chiefs game with you. Exploitation could be bad in some ways, and maybe this isn't like the worst thing ever as far as you cater to the fans in a different way that kind of helps them grow by following a story and feeling like they're part of a game too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can totally see that. And so into like miniatures, right? Painting them, building them. There's quite a few different ways of doing these things. They call like skirmishes, where you either have like these armies or these characters that you have miniatures and they have a set of rules where you can move, you can attack certain things, weapons make you bring certain dice to the table or a certain number of dice or cards. Yeah. All that. There's so many different ways that it's been played. Some of them are just a simple D6. Six-sided die, and others they make their own dice, whether it still follows the same shape, but there's not a 1 through 6 on there. It's like symbols and shapes. They have to, I don't know if it's for legal reasons, I don't know if it's for their own unique spin on something. I've looked into a few. There's a Star Wars role-playing game as well as some miniature fighting games that use a lot of these special dice that have symbols on it which mean like attacks or like critical attacks or a miss, something like that. Basically good outcomes, bad outcomes, and then good outcomes that have bad overtones or bad outcomes that have good overtones, which I think was super interesting. Instead of just being a yes or no, did you succeed? You have a successful dice, but then also maybe you like kill a guy, but it raises an alarm and like 3 other people come by. I thought that was really, really cool. Got a little sidetracked there, but what I was going to say is some of these games are overcomplicated. It's like, why didn't you just use, again, I don't know if it's legal reasons why they wouldn't just use something similar to a Dungeons and Dragons system. And I've seen that there's some unique parts of it. But I wonder if somebody came up with these ideas for a miniatures game, and they're like, well, what's the theme? And they're like, I don't know, let's just say it's Star Wars. So then me, a Star Wars fan, I'm like, oh, little Star Wars models. And now I have to learn a whole new game, and it's more complicated than one that I would rather play. I'm a big fan of the D20 system, as they call it. And so reading through a whole instruction manual on how to play this game slightly different than the one that I am so used to playing, I could see that as also kind of using story or an exploit to kind of boost your own numbers or get those people in the chairs, you know what I mean? Playing your game or watching it or being interested in it at all is generating that interest from attaching something to it. And I guess it's not necessarily unethical. I think it's interesting if it's like, hey, we have this really terrible game, but we don't know what to do with it. If we just make little green army men fighting, no one's gonna play it. It's like, well, make it Star Wars, so all the Star Wars fans have to buy it. There's a cynical view to it for sure. That's the same thing as like how far into conspiracy the whole Kansas City Chief thing goes, and how cynical you are about the big wigs at Big Board Game sitting there with their
Hasbro, we're talking to you.
big Hasbro over here, sitting there with their giant cigar the size of a baseball bat and being like, nah, make it Star Wars so everyone buys it. There's definitely a cynical outlook. Sometimes people come up with that first. Imagine, I'd like to. There's like a little rosy glasses. Is that how you say that? The rose-colored glass. I think there is a more positive outlook to it too, which is that like, I want to make a Star Wars game. How do we do it? It's like, well, we can't. Well, let's make it a little different this time. Do something in this way that will, be unique to itself. On the topic of tabletop RPGs, because we've been coming back to it quite a bit, in tabletop RPGs, you not only have to give a player the tools to create an entire world. I mean, let's take Dungeons and Dragons, for example, right? There is 3 big books you have to get if you knew nothing about the world and you're like, I'm not going to look into anything, I'm just going to read the books on how to play. There is an entire 200-300 page book just for how to be the storyteller, how to be fair. There's a whole book just for players on like how to play the game, whether that's characters, weapons, armor, abilities, tons of stuff like that. And then there's a whole book on just other characters, the monster manual. This is like all your challenges you can face out there. And I think that's super interesting. 2 of those are like way more important for storytelling, and then the other one's very important for the players. I think it's interesting that the rules themselves are so expansive that it goes to not only it's like the rules for the game, one person playing the game as every other character, and then one person playing the game as themselves, bound to their abilities. Creating that entire world around it, you have to guide the storyteller and the players with tangible rules, pretty much anything and everything, whether that's weapons, armor, handling specific situations, to as broad as possible. And so if we have some aspiring game designers or people looking into the psychology of games, what would be some things you would recommend? Say if you were trying to come up with your own RPG, your own story-based game, or just a game in general.
I think that, if I'm not mistaken, it's a lot of what you were just describing, actually. Game mechanics and how they apply to your game's purpose. In a game like Red Dead Redemption, you have this open world, so there's a lot of stuff you can do. But some things that stand out to me are some of the more monotonous, some of the more monotonous, which are like working at the ranch. That was something that I thought was really cool that they added into that game, because it helped you deep dive into the character of the environment, not just the person, but it allowed you to be a person in the character of the Old West and what it takes to run a ranch. I mean, I don't know if I was alone in this, but when I was playing that game and I started playing on the ranch, not even just like chasing bad guys and shooting stuff, right? But actually like working on the ranch, I was like, wow, being a cowboy, like a real cowboy or a rancher, would be pretty fun. And I felt like I could go out and do it, and it was motivating in a way that I hadn't seen a game do before. And I could only help but think that the developers, when they were doing that, they knew that doing some of these laborious tasks, whether it was like feeding the animals or collecting stuff from a garden or even going out and hunting, these things connected to something that they wanted the players to experience. They want their audience to connect to another time, a time of their ancestors, really. I mean, I can't think of really anyone whose ancestors didn't do a lot of stuff like that in that game, as far as the farm tasks. So I'd say when you're developing a game, think about the mechanics. Think about how your character is going to experience the world of your game. Even if it's not an RPG, just think about your presentation of the aspects of the game are going to give cues to the players as to what they're supposed to be getting from the game. If they're throwing a ball into a hole that is 10 feet away, you have to present it and set it up in a way where they understand what their task is. Okay, so that was a really kind of a bad example, but I love the RPG thing as an example, because they are so open world, so that the possibilities are kind of endless. I think when building the mechanics, you have to understand that there's multiple ways to get something done. For instance, are you going to feed your horse in the game? What does that entail? You know, if it doesn't matter for much more than just a difficulty thing for your character, to try and like be able to outlast and survive the game when it's very fast paced. Maybe it's just, hey, you have to press the select button every now and then to feed your horse, right? But you could also have a game that's super highly built on memory. So without prompting people, maybe you have to force them to remember without an icon on the screen telling them their horse is hungry or telling them press the select key. Maybe they have to remember, oh man, to feed my horse, I was only told this once, that when I hear it panting, giving them that cue, that mechanic that is acting as a cue. When I hear my horse panting, I have to remember that I have to press up, down,
Hmm.
right, square, X. Like that is the same outcome. Your horse gets fed, but the way that you lead your audience to that is defining what the game is for, whether it's just for getting their blood pumping and knowing, oh man, I have to press select before my horse dies, or whether it is forcing them to grow their memory patterns in their brain and everything in between that. You could have just one more example for a game that is about in-depth survival on the plains. Not only do you have to remember that your horse needs to get fed, and not only do you have to remember how to do it, but every step in between it, that might be walking around and finding enough carrots or wild onions, and then getting out your knife or crafting a knife to chop them up in a way that the horse is going to be able to digest them. That would be the biggest thing, I think, in game development, is keeping in mind what you want and what your audience needs and what you want your audience to take away from the game. That will lead you to creating a mechanic that is suitable for your end result.
I like that. There's a lot of different parts that come into game mechanics, and I would say at the top of this pyramid is it fun? But then a level lower than that, you have to understand, who is this fun for? What is going to make it fun for them? You won't really know one without any of the others. The person who you want to have fun from this, what are they getting from it? And how do they get there? I think that's a big part of it. I think knowing your audience is absolutely important. And if you're talking about skills to grow, I think in any part of life, knowing your audience, everyone's told that inappropriate joke that got them in just a little too much trouble, or knowing when and when not to speak. I think those are all like important things.
Yeah, absolutely. It really can, in a lot of ways, it can steer a person's life. I mean, I know it's funny, again, to say, like, games are a foundation of humanity, foundation of civilization, but not really, man. In my opinion, games have saved so many lives. There might have been that kid who started with Operation and, now they're a doctor, but they didn't just go from Operation to being a doctor. There were games that they played all along the way to simulate being a surgeon, and the same with gathering food or just motivating somebody to get out and experience the real world. Just like I had an example for Red Dead Redemption. I never really considered, the West or cowboy, but playing one on the big screen, it makes me feel like, this is really cool. Now I feel prepared to actually go out and experience nature and to walk around in the mountains and smell the fresh air and go build something. Or, now I know what it means to be disciplined, because if I can do this on a video game and be having fun, I can be building something in real life and be productive and be useful and still be having fun.
I'd feel a little less shame to admit that playing games like Skyrim and stuff, where it's mostly walking through nature, and Red Dead got me into going hiking and finding spots and really appreciating some things about that. Like some of those games, they'll have landmarks or towns that pop up on the map, and now it's just there. And I would think about that for my own life. I'm like, oh, that's the cactus that looks like somebody's melted face. Like, I'm gonna remember that forever. I'm like, oh, this, you take a left, using that for navigating. And then on another level, I think as a middle schooler, at some point, I not got tricked into it. I got roped into doing a lot of manual labor for my family, going to stay at my grandparents' house quite often. And I remember one time in middle school, we were going to my great grandmother's house to tear down and then rebuild a fence. And I remember the entire time just pretending it was like Minecraft, like digging holes and building like fence blocks and stuff. But I know what you're saying. Games are fun, or they should be, and fun is a big part of humanity. So it isn't too altruistic to say that games do play such a vital role in society, not only for confidence, for ambition, for skill, but also, I mean, they've been doing this for like thousands of years, right? I'm totally misquoting some stuff here, but I'm pretty sure they found like some form of playing cards, maybe drawn on wood back in like ancient China. So like they've been doing this forever. And I think people have always understood that a little entertainment doesn't hurt if you're learning something from it too, which is kind of what I'm trying to do here right now. A little fun and a little entertainment. Oh, I said that all backwards. Yeah, a little entertainment and a little education.